The Revelation War. This is a game about not an historical but a potential future conflict between Israel and, well, almost everybody else. There is a significantly large coalition of anti-Israeli forces that will be attacking Israel in this game, set in an hypothetical near future. It is a two-player game, but it can also be played solitaire. There are some moments in which I almost feel that the game was designed mainly, or would work mainly, as a solitaire game, designed from the point of view of the problems and the dilemmas facing the Israeli player. At least that's how I played it. I played solitaire, and I found that that was the side that I was most interested in controlling, directing, and seeing from the point of view of problem solving. The other side seemed to be a little more, not on autopilot, but you do have to pile up massive attacks against powerful Israeli units, and the point is for the Israeli player to figure out where those defenses should be. Now, I'm going to talk about this game only and strictly in game terms, because of course it's a very politically charged topic, and frankly I may be the only person in the Western world that doesn't really know enough about the Middle East to have an informed opinion, or maybe I'm the only person who knows that, I don't know. Another thing, interesting enough, this game for some players may have religious implications, may have connections with biblical prophecy, and actually the game takes that into account. So the game comes with some biblical counters that do not have rules associated with them, but you can create your own rules to, well, to insert or to add these counters. There are more, but these are the most interesting ones to me. And so you can have the presence of these units in the game. So you can play the standard game, or you can play an optional game with magic and superpowers. Well, not superpowers in the sense of China or Russia, but more like summoning fish fillet sandwiches for everybody. And that'd be a pretty cool superpower to have, actually. But without further ado, the Revelation War. Let's see how it works. The game takes place on this paper map here. I apologize in advance for the glare that comes from it, but it is the map that is glossy and there's just no way for me to avoid some reflection from the lights on the ceiling. So the main area of the confrontation will be this one with Israel and the West Bank. The rest of the map really doesn't come into play much, if at all. There will be a Chinese unit controlling the Suez Canal, and the Israeli player may want to go and attack it to score points, but other than that, the priority is for the Israeli player to defend Israel, and also possibly to eliminate some other static enemy units that start on the map. In particular, we have Palestinian units that will control most cities in Israel and on the West Bank, and then we have Hezbollah units that will cover every hex in Lebanon. These are static units. They do not move, they do not attack, they do not have zone of control, they only have one step, so that when they take a hit, they're eliminated. And also, they have random defense factors, so whenever you attack them, you roll a 6-sided die, and whatever the result is, that's how much strength they have. As for other units, they have 3 factors printed on them. They have attack factor, defense factor, and number of steps. So this unit has 2 steps. If it takes a hit, it is flipped to the other side. 1 step is left. Another hit, it is eliminated. The units do not have movement factors printed on them. For the Israeli units, it's a fixed factor between 6 and 8, and you will have the rule book to tell you which ones have which. The Russian and Chinese anti-Israel units also have a fixed movement factor, but then all of the other anti-Israeli units have random movement factors. That is, each time you activate them, you roll 86, and the result is how many points they have, which of course introduces quite a bit of randomness. However, on the other side, the confrontation is close and personal from the very beginning, because the anti-Israeli units will start from here and from here. As you can see, they don't have to go a long way to threaten Israeli cities. You may have noticed when I show you this Israeli marker here that it apparently has 8 steps. Well, that's not apparently, that's exactly how many it has, which means that that unit is actually represented by 4 different counters, 3 of which will be out of the game at any time, and 1 will be representing the current number of steps. This one takes a hit, it's flipped, takes another hit, it is replaced by the next one, and so on and so forth. Also, there are no replacements in the game. Units can only get worse and never better, and there are no reinforcements. People that are on the game, on the board at the beginning of the game, they will be there, of course, and no one else will be there. No one else will arrive later. I'm just placing a couple of counters randomly here and there. Now, another important, very important unit in the game, I don't know if it counts as a unit, marker, is air power. The Israeli air power is supposed to be unchallengeable in this game, so the Israeli player is the only one that has air support markers, and these markers are placed on the board at the beginning of the turn. They influence the hex in which they are and the 6 hexes surrounding them, and they slow down enemy units that are moving in those hexes, and also they provide a bonus in combat to the Israeli player. Are those 2 sides of the same unit? No, they're not. Now, turn structure. At the beginning of a turn, the Israeli player places their air power markers. Again, these are really key for the game to work, for the Israeli player not to be slaughtered very easily by the enemies. So first we have the air power phase. Then the Israeli player goes, actually no, there is another phase, which is the cyber war phase, which is a fairly complicated procedure, I guess, for what it is, where players will acquire cyber war markers and then they can spend them to gain advantages. But it seems to be a lot of war for not much, really. These advantages are really game breaking, and they kind of tend to cancel each other out, to the point that the designer is aware of this. I saw a comment online by the designer saying that if a player thinks that the cyber war on the 2 sides more or less is the same, the 2 sides of the cyber war cancel each other out, you can just ignore that element of the game, which is what I did. And the game just is more streamlined that way, and I don't think it really missed much. So after the, let's call it optional cyber war phase, you have the Israeli phase, in which the Israeli player can choose to move and then declare and resolve attacks, or to attack first and then move. So you can choose the order in which you do things. If you attack first, you're gonna have a bonus in combat. It's gonna count as a prepared attack, and you're gonna have a bonus of a column shift on the combat result table. When you move, well, you move up to your full movement allowance with different costs for different types of terrain. All combat units, with the exception of Palestinians and Hezbollah, project a zone of control in the 6 hexes surrounding them, and you have to stop when you enter an enemy zone of control. And this is particularly important, or particularly vital, really, for the Israeli player that needs to stop enemy units from entering Israeli cities, and the way to do so is to play well with the bottlenecks, to use terrain and zones of control to basically block the line and prevent the movement from the opponent. The opponent cannot sneak past, they have to constantly attack to kind of push you back, but you're defending in good terrain, you have your support, you have defense factors of 10 or 20. Well, it's going to be tough for the opponent to beat that, to push you out of that. So movement and combat is set, or combat and movement being better for the Israeli player. How we resolve combat? Using a differential combat table. That is, you declare an attack, You put together all of the attack factors of the attacker, you subtract the defense factors of the defender, finding a differential. Then you look at the column that better describes that differential. You apply modifiers, column shifts based, say, on concentric attacks, based on attacking before moving for the Israeli player, based on terrain effects. And once you have the actual column, roll a die, cross-reference, and then you have the number of losses taken respectively by the attacker left of the slash and defender right of the slash. You apply those step losses, and that's how you resolve combat. After the Israeli player moves and attacks, or attacks and moves, their choice, the anti-Israeli coalition player does the same, which is they also decide if they want to attack and then move, and then attack. They do not get a bonus, differently from the Israeli player, if they attack before moving, but they get a penalty if they move before attack. Again, penalties being column shifts. And since they are the ones on the move, that is particularly bad for them. And again, that compounds with the problem of the Israeli player having a good defense and also having air support. An interesting thing is that, oopsie, the camera fell. Almost. We're good. Another interesting thing is that if you look at the differential combat table, you will notice that when you are attacking a 0 or less, there is no chance of inflicting damage on the enemy, on the defender, so that's a bad idea. And for the anti-coalition player, it may take some work when the defender has so many advantages in column shifts and other factors. It can be really tough to have a differential which is not even decent, but at least above 0. So you continue like this for 7 turns, unless the anti-coalition player manages to enter an Israeli city through advance after combat, in which case that's instant victory for the anti-Israeli player. If that doesn't happen, the game goes until the end of the 7th turn, and then you count victory points that the Israeli player only can score by eliminating enemy units, by taking control of certain locations on the map, and then based on how many points the Israeli player scored, you determine who won and by what margin. The Revelation War is a fairly small game, much smaller than you would imagine when you look at the box or you look at the map. Because really, as I said and showed, only part of the map matters. As an Israeli player, you may again try to attack the Chinese unit, but other than that, it is a small game. It feels, not just for the size of the map, but the breadth, the span, the overall overarching idea. It almost feels like it's a magazine game that was repackaged as a boxed game. It's the kind of game that if I get in a War Game magazine, then I read the article, I play once or twice, and I'm perfectly fine with it. It feels a little thin as a boxed game that comes, of course, with the price tag of a boxed game. And it's, mind you, it's not a bad game. I actually enjoyed it. It just feels a little limited in terms of gameplay. For the Israeli player, there's the fun challenge of, well, stopping and preventing instant victory by the anti-Israeli coalition player. And so that's interesting, that's challenging. In a certain sense, the early phases almost feel like Workers Drift in the near future, because you're completely outnumbered, you have a fairly large area that you need to control, and the first turn you do not have air power. So the first turn is really key. If you hold your ground as an Israeli player until the end of the first turn, then those air supports come in and things become much easier. However, the dilemma in a sense feels a little less tough than at first when you realize the bottlenecks that you can exploit using zone of control, using air power, and using terrain. In that sense, the game, when you really realize that it's not that hard to hold the line as you usually play it, in that sense it feels almost geometric, almost abstract. And mind you, every game, every war game, in essence, of course, is about being in that place rather than than in the other. And yet a lot of games flash out that in a way that you feel that has to do with the tactics, the strategy, with the story that takes place there, as opposed to in chess or Go or checkers really being in that space rather than that other space. It really feels like one hex difference makes the entire difference. And again, it's not that this is unique to this war game. It's almost like in this war game you see it more, and precisely because of that it has more of an abstract quality than other games. You're really counting hexes, you're really using the traditional every other hex defense, this way that each hex of the line is covered either by a unit or by a zone of control to prevent the opponents from rushing through. So there isn't all that much replay value because there are only so many configurations, and there are not many, that make sense and will prevent the anti-coalition player from achieving instant victory. And that's one of the limits, of course. But then, the first game you're gonna, as the Israeli player, work so hard to prevent instant enemy victory. You realize it's not that hard, and you realize that you lost the game anyways. Because not losing the game to instant defeat is not enough to win the game. As the Israeli player, you also have to score quite a number of points by doing different things, such as destroying the Russian units, destroying all units of certain members of the coalition, taking control, at least for a second there, of certain locations on the map. So you just rush in, touch base, and run back, which is a little unusual, but that's what the game stipulates. So then it becomes more of a puzzle in which you have to prevent instant victory, but then also invest units to complete those other objectives. So from the Israeli side, it's challenging to win. From the other side, it just feels again not that interesting to play. Mind you, I play both sides at the best of my possibilities. I play the game only solitaire, but it just felt that way because after the first waves of attacks, once the Israeli player takes control of the best defensive positions, things out their line a little bit to complete those other objectives. You keep attacking, but then your attack loses steam in the last 2 or 3 turns. You just can't do much as the anti-Israeli player, if the other side has been competent enough. And then you're pretty much sitting there as the Israeli player runs around trying to complete those objectives. In that sense, again, it really seems to me like a solitaire game from the Israeli point of view more than anything else. But again, more than anything else, it feels like a magazine game that is being marketed as a boxed game. It's not a bad game. And again, I enjoyed it, but it's just a little too thin. A little too thin to me to hold my interest over many plays. And that's the way it is. It's not a bad game. I would be giving it, I don't know if a glowing, but a definitely really strong positive review if this was a magazine game. For a box game, it's just a little too thin. I don't know that there is much there to hold the player's interest for long, especially an advanced player, especially a seasoned war gamers. It can work as an introductory war game because the rules are very simple. And that's my assessment of the Revelation War.